Welcome to Trashmagination, a podcast about reimagining trash. I'm Carla Brown. Today we'll talk about a great community building idea and marketing idea for your town. It's called a recycled art sculpture trail. Instead of hosting an arts festival that takes place all in one area, people experience art along a trail. Maybe it's in a downtown area, or maybe it's along an actual hiking trail. And I'm hoping that when you hear about these trails, you might be inspired to make one in your area. It certainly got me thinking about which local botanical garden I could convince to let me build giant recycled art sculptures. One interesting point about hosting a recycled art sculpture trail is that you need to protect the work from two things, from weather and from vandalism. And the sculpture trails that I have looked at, they tackled these challenges in 5 different ways. First, they hosted the trail in a busy place, like a spot with heavy foot traffic, even at night, so someone is always able to keep an eye on the sculptures. Or sometimes they host the trail in parks, botanical gardens, or on museum grounds where the gates can be closed at night. Or they build sculptures that would be very difficult to damage, such as those built from wood or from welded metal. Or they make sculptures that can be moved inside at nighttime. And then the last method that I observed is that they offer the trail only for a very short time, like maybe 1 or 2 days. Another interesting point about these trails is that some are made by a whole group of artists, while others are made by just one artist. So whether you are part of a community organization or whether you are an individual artist, there is more than one way to make a recycled art sculpture trail. And today, I'm going to focus on sculpture trails that involve recycled plastic, wood, or metal. There are trails that recycle natural materials, which is very cool, but today I'm going to focus on plastic, wood, and metal. So I first became acquainted with the idea of showing art along a trail through an organization called Trails and Vistas, which hosts annual art hikes in the Lake Tahoe area. I met the founder, Nancy Teakin-Lopez, back in 2010. The Trails and Vistas hikes take place over 2 days each September. All along the trails, there are artists creating magical moments. There are musicians, dancers, and people wearing incredible costumes, as well as visual art pieces. In 2019, it's happening on September 6th and 7th. They also do a huge concert and a field trip program for 3rd graders called Dreaming Tree. This event is not focused on recycled art sculptures per se, but I wanted to mention it because it was the first time that I heard about art on a trail, and many of their costumes are also made from recycled materials. The next sculpture trail I'll talk about is called Sculpture by the Sea. It is the world's largest free public sculpture exhibition, and it has been happening since 1997. It takes place in 2 parts of Australia currently. Each October and November, it's in Bondi Beach near Sydney, and then in March, it is in Cottesloe near Perth in Western Australia. Most of the sculptures in this show are not made from recycled materials, but here are my favorites which are made from recycled materials. The first was by Georgina Humphreys, and it was called Ground Swell. She collected tents and nylon fabrics at festivals, and then she sewed them into a series of pyramid shapes, and all attached together. And she hung them on a hill going down to the beach. And when the wind blew up the hill from the ocean, it caused the pyramids to stand up really tall. And when the wind blew down the hill, it caused the pyramids to all point down. I just loved how this sculpture was so colorful and always moving. The next is a sculpture by Sherry Padden. She built a tent out of stuffed toys that she gathered from op shops. That's what Australians call thrift or secondhand shops. And the next sculpture was by Carrie Argent called Overconsumption. She built 5 sculptures from plastic caps all connected with zip ties. These represent the gyres in the ocean where the ocean currents have swept trash into these huge islands of trash. She also made a sculpture called Homeless from recycled textiles that looked like a series of 5 patchwork tents. And here's an idea from this event that you might consider if you organize a similar event. They host tactile tours, which are tours for people with visual impairments or other challenges who would benefit from touching the sculptures. On most recycled art sculpture trails, people are not necessarily encouraged to touch the sculptures or they might damage them, although I'm sure it happens all the time because it is the nature of these trails that the sculptures are not 100% supervised. The next recycled art sculpture trail is in the UK, and it's called the Teignmouth Recycled Art in the Landscape. If you take the first letter of each of those words in that name, it spells the word trail. This event has been happening for 15 years in South Devon. Just like Sculpture by the Sea, the sculptures are on a trail along a seafront, and this trail is open from the end of July to the beginning of September. And in addition, there are gallery exhibits and workshops. The trail incorporates visual art, performance pieces, and fashion. And the whole event ends in an arts festival. This year, they also made a giant fish out of discarded fishing rods, an old swing set, and chicken wire, which they called Rodney Goblet. And that's where people are going to put their single-use plastic bottles inside his mouth to be recycled. You can vote for your favorite sculptures online. My favorite is the Teignmouth Horse by Steve Yeats. It's a metal horse that gallops when the wind blows, and that's because the legs of the horse are attached to a small wind turbine that was made from a recycled metal oil drum. The next 2 recycled art sculpture trails are on the east coast of the United States, and they are happening this summer. The first is by one of my absolute favorite plastic creative reuse artists, Aurora Robson. She is a Canadian-American like me. Her sculptures involve taking plastic trash and shaping it into abstract shapes. This summer, until August 24th, she has an exhibit called Aglow at the Schuylkill Center for Environmental Education near Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And these sculptures light up at dusk. In New York City, there is an exhibit by Nicholas Holliber called Birds on Broadway, the Audubon Sculpture Project. It opened in May 2019, and it will continue until January 2020. This trail is presented in partnership with the New York City Department of Parks and New York City Audubon. It features 10 huge wooden sculptures of birds, and these bird species all live in New York City or they fly through it on their migratory routes, and they're all impacted by climate change. He built them from reclaimed wood from shipping pallets, which he found around New York City. When I was in New York in June, I saw one of these sculptures right on Broadway. They are all located along Broadway, starting at 64th Street all the way up to 157th Street, which is a 5-mile walk. If you love the birds on Broadway made from reclaimed lumber, then you must get acquainted with the recycled art sculptures of Thomas Dambo. I've mentioned him in many previous episodes because I am a super fan. He builds huge wooden sculptures all over the world from reclaimed lumber with many volunteers. 2 of his sculpture trails are, the first one is in his home country of Denmark, in western Copenhagen, and the second one I'll talk about is at the Morton Arboretum in Chicago. In both places, he built a series of sculptures hidden in the vegetation and rocks, and you can search for them. The trolls in Denmark are called the 6 Forgotten Giants. Thomas was hired by the municipalities of West Copenhagen to build the giants in hidden areas of local parks to encourage people to explore. These sculptures were not the first wooden giants he had built. He had built them all around the world, but this was the first time he made a trail of them. And then later, the Morton Arboretum hired him to build 6 trolls, not giants, and they now have a similar experience until January 2020. One of my favorites is throwing a giant rock on an old car. Besides building trails with giants and trolls, Thomas has also built a garden in Mexico City from plastic flowers and creatures called the Future Forest. There is a trail through this garden, and this is one of my favorite sculptures of all time. Another recycled art sculpture artist with a big sense of humor is Patrick Amiot. He is another Canadian who moved to the United States, just like myself and Aurora Robson, who I already mentioned. Patrick and his wife Brigitte Laurent make very large metal sculptures in Sebastopol, which is in Northern California. My favorites are the ones that were clearly influenced by Patrick's Canadian heritage, such as the Mountie and the Toronto Maple Leafs goalie. In 2001, Patrick put his first giant sculpture on his front lawn, and he knew it was likely that someone would come along and tell him that he needed to remove it. But instead, his neighbors loved it. And since then, he made a series of huge sculptures for each of his neighbors' lawns. And now their street has become a tourist attraction. For 3 blocks on Florence Avenue, people can see the many hilarious recycled art sculptures made from all kinds of metal, including car parts, pots, irons, giant metal cans, and more. Patrick builds the sculptures and Brigitte paints them. The most impressive recycled art sculpture trail that I have ever visited in person is called Washed Ashore. These are very large sculptures of ocean wildlife, all made from trash that washed up on beaches. I first talked about this work in episode 42, which was about beach trash. The artist behind this trail is Angela Hazeltine Pozzi. This exhibit is currently showing in many zoos and other facilities around North America, including in Arkansas, Oklahoma, Ontario, Oregon, and Utah. In fact, these pieces just keep on traveling. They've traveled all over, and I saw them here in Washington, D.C. when they were at the National Zoo. Other recycled art sculpture artists focus on the theme of wildlife also. Gilles Senazondote also makes wildlife sculptures with plastic he finds at the beach. In 2017, his work was displayed in an area near Lake Tahoe on a recycled art sculpture trail as part of an environmental festival called Creating Equilibrium. To make his sculptures, he first sculpts a piece of polyurethane foam, and then he covers it with plastic pieces that he found on the beach. Michelle Reeder makes animal sculptures from plastic, and I first heard about her this month when her sculptures were at the Remarkable Recycling Gala, which is located in Nottingham in the UK. According to her website, the sculptures are now featured at local sites such as the Marwell Zoo. In the town of Paisley in Scotland, there is an animal-themed sculpture trail built by Kevin Cantwell. Paisley is located west of Glasgow. It looks like most of his sculptures are made from recycled tires, including a panda, a bumblebee on a thistle, and a ladybug. The last recycled art sculpture trail that I'll mention is at the Catskill Visitor Center in New York. It includes a hilarious sculpture by Adrian Landon of a dung beetle pushing a giant sphere of trash. In the sphere, there are plastic shopping carts and lots of other trash. Adrian said this sculpture represents humanity's need to recycle. I hope this dung beetle and all the other wildlife sculptures that I mentioned today have inspired you to recycle. Thank you for listening. Please let me know about any more recycled art sculpture trails that you have heard about by contacting me at trashmagination@gmail.com. Until next time, may you see recycled art sculpture trails as a source of art in your life.